Why are Range Rovers so popular? From 2013 to 2019, almost 1.7 million cars were sold from the Range Rover family. This includes the full-size Range Rover, the Range Rover Sport, the Range Rover Velar, and the Range Rover Evoque. Anyone that makes a bit of money soon bags themselves a new Range Rover to show off their new success. They're all over big cities like London, New York, LA and Dubai, usually cruising at less than 20 miles an hour and never actually going off-road. The older models each have their own cult following of die-hard fans speaking nothing but good about the Range Rover, and as much as they're known for luxury and comfort, they're also well known for their long list of reliability issues. So how did the Range Rover become a worldwide icon? I'm Shafi, this is the Car Crunch, let's get into it. Before we do that, if you like our videos, subscribe to the channel and share with your friends to help us reach 1,000 subscribers by December. Range Rovers began their journey in 1970 as versatile two-door SUVs that offered both spacious comfort and impressive off-roading abilities, capable of towing up to 3.5 tons and still achieving a remarkable, for the time, top speed of 100 miles an hour. Now over time the Range Rover was updated and refined with more luxury and more tech packed in each time. In the 90s, sedans were the most popular body shape of car. But in the early 2000s, SUV popularity started rocketing as well, as safety and driving technology improved their comfort and handling. The car makers spotted this trend and jumped on the bandwagon. Porsche engineers put their thinking hats on and came up with the Cayenne, Mercedes released the ML, and BMW released the X5. All three of them stood out in their own way, but the Range Rover had been built for over 30 years at this point, and already on its second generation. SUVs are literally the only cars that Land Rover released under the Range Rover name, so they were perfectly placed to take full advantage of this boom. And they did exactly that when they freshly released the L322 Range Rover, which took over from the slightly older P38. Now the L322 came packed with a much nicer, much more modern feeling interior compared to the P38. Even now, 20 years later, they still look reasonably modern and classy. That is if they're not ruined by some kind of tacky looking aftermarket kit, or if they haven't been blacked out and got some giant wheels on them. According to Jeremy Clarkson, the L322 is still the best Range Rover made, and he still uses it to get around in his farm. Until 2004, Land Rover produced only one car under the Range Rover name, the Range Rover. No surprises there. In 2004, while other competitors were gearing up to release their first SUV, Land Rover were already 3 steps ahead and preparing to release a second SUV in the Range Rover family. Alongside the L322 that I mentioned earlier, the slightly smaller, new L320 Range Rover Sport was released. It's a bit of a push to call a big boxy car that weighs around 2,500 kg or 5,500 pounds a sport, but it was a hit nevertheless. And over the years, the Range Rover Sport had a few facelifts until the next generation was released in 2013, which is the L494. Now personally, I think this is the best looking and best value for money Range Rover Sport so far, and maybe even the best Range Rover so far in terms of value for money and looks. And 10 years later, it still looks as at home driving around Kensington or Manhattan or Jumeirah Beach in Dubai as it did when it was first released. Now in terms of size, as I mentioned, it's a little bit smaller than the full-size Range Rover. It sits just below that in the lineup. It rides a little bit firmer and handles a little bit sharper, but it still manages to keep the overall Range Rover feel. As you'd expect, it also costs a little bit less. It's still expensive, but it's less than a full-size Range Rover. The Sport came at the perfect time and massively helped the brand with its popularity, with the 1 millionth model of it being sold in December 2020. Now sitting just below the Range Rover Sport is the Range Rover Velar. Again, slightly smaller, slightly less expensive, and this time focused more on aesthetics over off-roading. The Velar is the newest addition to the Range Rover family, only joining in 2017. It was the first of the Range Rovers to feature the flush door handles that we see on all of the new models, and its roofline kind of resembled the Sport, but with a harsher slope, similar to the BMW X6. Originally I thought it looked amazing in the press shots, but when I saw it in person it lacked a bit of wow factor that a Range Rover should have. It must have been because I saw a base model in white with some tiny wheels. The spec in the press shots probably looks amazing. It was like a dark grey colour with black 20-inch wheels. Considering the Velar's cheaper price and sleeker looks, it's no surprise that the Velar contributed massively to the recent popularity boost that Range Rovers have had. And finally, in the Range Rover lineup, sitting just below the Velar, is the Range Rover Evoque. This is the smallest SUV in the Range Rover family and by far the cheapest way to get yourself into a car with the big Range Rover letters across the hood. Being that it's the most affordable, it's also the largest contributor to the brand's recent popularity, and it's even outsold the mighty full-size Range Rover every single year since its release in 2013. The whole Range Rover family have a broadly similar, simple SUV shape that pays homage to the Range Rover Classic of the 1970s. The chunky front end, slightly sloping roofline and hatchback tailgate gives Range Rovers their signature look. The The giant lettering across the front and rear end were a bit unorthodox to start with, and they shouldn't have worked, but they do. Over the recent years, bonkers versions of the Range Rovers have been added to the lineup. Cars like the Range Rover Sport SVR or the Range Rover SV Autobiography that make absolutely zero sense. It's a giant heavy car with a thirsty supercharged V8. Whoever signed off on those needs a medal. The updated styling and these higher power models made the Range Rover massively popular among the younger crowd. People that would usually see the older Range Rovers and think they're snooty old people cars see the newer Range Rovers and they're interested. By far the biggest thing that makes Range Rovers stand out is their luxury connotations. You could buy a Nissan Juke, but you'd rather buy a Range Rover Evoque because it has Range Rover plastered across the front. Or you could buy a Skoda SUV, it will do you perfectly well, but you'd rather buy a Range Rover because it's a Range Rover and it just oozes class and luxury. Basically, it's a giant status symbol. Range Rovers have humongous cult followings, and with that comes a bunch of companies making body kits for them. The list is endless. There's Urban Automotive, Mansory, Overfinch, Luma, Onyx, Revere, and the list goes on. Look out for another video soon where I'll be rating all of these different Range Rover kits. Some of them are absolutely horrendous. All these body kit makers are contributing to the popularity of Range Rovers as they promote the car to their own audience and build their own cult following for their brand. Body kits are obviously just the beginning. A lot of kit companies actually offer full interior overhauls as well, replacing the seats, carpets, headliner, sometimes even the steering wheel, gear knobs and all that other sort of stuff. Some of these models fetch a heavy premium and sometimes it's kind of hard to see why. Objectively, a lot of the kits are trash. There's also a whole other side to Range Rover modifications where the mods are done to make the car better off-road rather than just look better. Things like snorkels, longer range suspension, lift kits and giant tyres rather than wide arches, big wheels and pretty leather on the inside. Range Rovers are massive around the world at the moment and it looks like they plan to carry on in that direction with the new Range Rover EV coming very soon. Personally, I hope that it has better reliability than the current Range Rovers and the older ones, and I hope that it especially delivers on the range side. It'd be nice if it could do more than 400 miles on one charge, at least. That's all for today. Subscribe if you like the video, help us get to 1,000 subs by December, and I'll catch you next week for more.